all day, but here we go.
Here we go. I have that cup.
Oh, hey, that's
It's so funny.
that's our go-to here. All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our session on the evolution of AI in customer service. My name's John McMullen from the Observe AI team. Thrilled to be talking today with you all and our guest, Dr. Natalie, about how customer service is evolving in the age of Gen AI. And really, we brought in an expert here to help think about not just the tactical sides, but really how this impacts the organization and the humans behind it. So I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Natalie. Please, if you have a moment, will you share with our guests a bit more about yourselves?
Thank you, John. Customer service and customer experience and agent experience is one of the things I'm most passionate about. I've been in the space for a really long time. I was a Forrester analyst, and when self-service first came out, there was all kinds of predictions about where the field was going to go and how things were going to change. And what I have gotten to witness is the evolution of technology. What is frustrating for me as someone who truly cares about this topic is I'm not sure that with each evolution, at least not until now, that we really made it better from the customer's point of view. So that's why I'm really thrilled to have this conversation with you and love what you guys are doing.
I appreciate it. I know it's, I joke, how fast time moves here since the advent of Gen AI, but even before that, right? We've been promising this kind of technology for quite some time. And organizations have certainly looked at implementing and trying new things and driving things like self-service. There was a point in time where everybody's got to have the website, everybody's got to have the app, and we drove customers through all these hoops to jump through to just try to get basic information. And it's amazing how fast things have evolved now, where it's almost coming back to human-like side of things. How do we make these interactions potent and human-like instead of just worrying about deflect. And that kind of tees us up here for the first of our three conversations, but really the evolution of AI in customer service. The advent of IVRs in the 80s and 90s was seen as revolutionary. Can I get to the right subject matter expert by pressing a button? And how quick that helped, but how dated it's become. Kind of skipping forward a bit, and I know you spent a lot of time around this space, but the concept of like chatbots, right? Can I ask something in natural language? How does even IVRs, which have kind of advanced, but these chatbots kind of, how did these systems come about? They were pretty prevalent. How did they catch on? And then kind of, what was their downfall, and why are companies not looking at it? I'm curious on your perspective.
So I think that there was a promise, right? And there always is with technology. And those of us, are on the technology side, we always want to do the right thing by brands and by customers and by employees. And so at the time when old chatbots, these rule-based bots were introduced, the idea was that we would be able to figure out what customers were going to ask, and we would be able to get them help. The problem with these was because they're rule-based systems, you actually had to use a logic and begin to predict all the things that your customers were going to say. And what we found was, unless maybe, you have 5 to 10 answers, it was difficult to get there. And so what happened to customers is they would say, this is what I need, and the bot would appear like it didn't understand. And it was mostly because the logic wasn't there. And so what happened is we kind of trained customers not to trust the bot. And there was a lot of frustration. And there were a lot of promises like first contact resolution, increased customer sat, and all those things. And that's really where the evolution of, for me, empathy came from, was when you sit in the seat of the customer or you sit in the seat of the employee and you start to really see the experience through their eyes. Even though the promise of the technology was trying to reach that ultimate customer experience, it was limited.
Yeah, I think limitations still are very prevalent. I think people were willing to try it. You're right. It's I don't know. People when they're in desperate need of help came to try it, came to use it and do it, but the experience was lacking at best. Um, and they really did get trained to, hey, you only go here for like the most basic or the most routine type questions because if you're in dire need of help, the experience was lacking so much so that it almost felt like a block in the way of trying to get to a human, right? It's one of my favorite icebreaker questions for us in the space. But like, what's your least favorite customer service example where you scream agent 10 times and you're like, I just need help, but you had to go through the hoops to get there. Um, you mentioned rules based. I think to touch on that really quick, just from your expertise, right? We want our AI to have rules, otherwise it'll run wild. You know, back when you're building these chatbots or even some of the more modern esque conversational AI, what's the difference between like rules based, because we do need some business rules, versus like these mapped models, in your words?
So I think kind of you if you look at this is how I see I kind of see an evolution. I see rule-based systems, right, which was based on kind of simple if-then logic. And what we found was, they have application, right? It was better than sending everything to all the agents. We wanted to have some self-service. But often what happened is when a customer didn't get what they needed, then they would, you know, try to contact an agent or try a bunch of different channels. And so the inability to handle complex or not even that complex of questions reduced that trust, right? And so then the next evolution, so we went role-based bots, then we went conversational AI, which was an improvement because we were using machine learning and predictive analytics. And there we were saying, well, if they're asking about this, then there's an inference, and that probably means that here's what they need. But that didn't always work either. And so while it was getting better, it still didn't meet always when you sit in the seat of the customer, the things that they really truly wanted. And so it's better, right? And from a technology point of view, you see the progression, you see the change in process. But I think what, at the end of the day, what customers truly want is they want help. Right? And so while it sounds good when you're saying it fast, it looks great on paper. In practice, it's always more difficult to be able to satisfy what a customer needs. And so where we are now, so we have the role-based bots, then we have a conversational AI. And if you're, someone in a brand and you're listening to this, you want to think about what is it that I have, right? And where what am I frustrated about, right? Am I looking at FCR? Am I looking at CSAT? Am I looking at the number of calls that get transferred to an agent from self-service? And if those are things that are concerning or frustrating to you, then I think this next generation of contact center applications and Gen AI is really, and I know we keep saying that this is the big
This is
deal, right, John?
yeah.
But I think that, and that's what a lot of there's a lot of hype around Gen AI, but I think that one of the coolest places to apply Gen AI is customer service because we haven't been able, based on the old technology, to be able to satisfy those experiences, and because it's a great application for this type of technology.
Yeah, agreed, right? There's always that promise, but things certainly got moved forward fast with the chat GPT moment, right? We'd be remiss to not mention that. Of
Well,
it went,
do you remember that November when it was like all these announcements and like the world, it almost sounded like, we're all going to be replaced, right? And
yeah,
so and I can tell you, I was like, wow, okay, so maybe there's something, because I've been in the tech space a long time. So I was like, okay, well, maybe those statements are true, right? And I know a lot of people who run contact centers were like, well, what's going to happen? And, am I going to get rid of all my agents? And what I can tell you is that, and Gartner does a really good job of this, is they plot out a hype cycle, right? And so there's hype and there's all these promises, and then that curve goes from the top, and then as we start to implement, we start to really see, okay, what's the application, what's the reality? And I think what's happening now is we're seeing companies and brands and customer service, customer experience executives trying to understand the difference between the role based, the conversational AI, and what's really different here. And now that I think we're somewhat out of the hype phase, now we can start to think about, all right, what does this mean for me? Right. And what does this mean for my customers? But yeah, that was an interesting moment. And there was all these predictions about getting rid of everybody, you know. And so I had to sit down myself and really look at that and say, what does that mean? And I think that what it actually means is that we can deliver an experience that's satisfying to the customer, to the agent after they, you know, let's say a call does or interaction does get transferred to them, and that it can also help the business. And I think at the end of the day, if you can have a situation, if you can have a situation where everybody wins, right? Then happy customers and happy employees mean better business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, it caught the world by storm, but it was a good inflection point too for understanding, just as you said, what does this mean for me, right? It's one thing to have a publicly available technology that's cool or, you know, fun to play with, but that doesn't always mean business applications. And I think we're getting there, which kind of leads me to like, what is generative AI, right? We talked briefly on conversational AI, and I spent time early in my life, right? The intent maps, and you said, trying to infer what the customer was asking about. But even then, right, nobody speaks in common enough language where you're intent hunting. Is the person saying billing or upset about their bill? Because that's two different things. Or maybe changing their bill or billing location. So it gets pretty messy because, to your point, on the intent mapping side, there's the world of you have to understand everything you know and things you don't know because you don't know what the customer is going to ask about. So even stuff you don't want to automate, you have to know that you're not going to talk about it. But generative AI has kind of flipped that on its head. And I think there's still a lot of confusion around that. So I know, you've spent time not only thinking about this and what it means to me and what it means to business, but like, what does generative AI fundamentally mean and how do people make it their own?
So I think there's a couple pieces here. So there was a story on the internet about using, I think it was ChatGPT at the time, and I was talking to a customer, and they said, "Well, Nat, how come? Why don't I just use ChatGPT? Right? Why do I need to buy a contact center solution?" And so the story goes, you can Google this. The story goes that there was someone who was trying to outsmart the bot. And long story short, the customer outsmarted the open source AI, and it got the company to sell them a truck for $1. Right? So, and I think, like, you know, that's interesting. So part of it is, why do you want to buy a system, right? Why can't you just use, you know, like the open source? And that's like, if you haven't, I would say, if you're an executive and you haven't started really playing with ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, you can't really get a visceral sense of the value of generative AI until you start to use it yourself. And so that, you know, 2 Novembers ago is really when I sat down and I said, okay, let me start playing with the tools and just see generally what this does. And it's a wow moment. It's a really, like, you don't have to be a programmer. And you can really generate a lot of cool things fast. The problem with that is that if you're running an enterprise or even an SMB, you really want to make sure that you're containing what's happening, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I think the real difference in generative AI is that it's all about the context. So it's really important here is to understand, and I think what we're trying to get at, whether it's rule based or the conversational predictive AI, is what's really difficult to program is the context. right? And the sentiment. And there were, predictive AI did give us some sentiment analysis, but to truly understand from the customer's point of view what they're asking for and what they're needing, what's really interesting about generative AI and the way that the large language models take that information in. There's all kinds of detailed programming stuff, but basically it takes that and then can make connections, and it provides context. It provides this ability to generate novel experiences.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible, right? And context is always king, even for the best human agents, right? When we're talking
I
about,
think even for you and I, like just
yeah,
humans, right? Like
humans,
you could
absolutely.
say, "Hey Nat, how are you today?" And I could say, "I'm fine, John," or I could say, "I'm fine." Right? And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the same words, but the context is so drastically different. And you as a human brain, right, with your mirror neurons, you can go, "Oh, wow, Nat's having a great day." Or, "Oh, actually, maybe Nat's not having the best day at all." And so part of what we're looking for from technology is to mimic us, right, without taking over, because there's the fear of that. And so how do we apply the best of technology and the best of the human experience? And I think it's that combination that Gen AI really provides to us. Is it will allow us to have the context.
Hmm.
It will allow us to understand truly from the customer's point of view what they're looking for and what they need, and in doing that, it's really gonna meet the needs of the business.
Oh, yeah, that is spot on and certainly exciting. I know our next conversation is specifically around how does that context, how does Gen AI unlock the capabilities for a customer service strategy. So I think our next session here will pick up that topic. But yeah, really enjoyed this conversation, and we'll speak about more applicable use cases here soon.
Sounds great.